World-famous bedtime stories from Mom. Today's story is Don Quixote. Long ago, in a quiet village of Spain, lived a country nobleman whose name has been forgotten, but his story will forever be remembered. He owned vast and peaceful lands, but his heart always yearned for something greater. Buried among heavy books day after day, he read the legends of heroic knights. In his imagination, he was always the protagonist, convinced that it was his destiny to become a valiant knight and battle evil. One day he finally made up his mind. "Monsters, come fort! Take this shining lance!" he shouted, hitting the desk and standing up. "Oh, beautiful princess, do not worry. I will surely save you," he muttered with a serious and brave expression, as if he were a knight about to face a real battle. At that moment he was no longer a mere country nobleman. In his heart, he had become a true knight. "Now I too must embark on a great adventure like the true knights. I will make the whole world remember my name." His voice was filled with determination, and his eyes sparkled with the passion for adventure. The country nobleman now accepted his new identity, beginning preparations to become a true knight. His family had an old suit of armor. Though covered in dust and rusted in places, it was perfect for him. He donned the armor, dusted it off, and stood in front of the mirror. Wearing this armor makes me look splendid. I mustn't forget the helmet and lance," he murmured, satisfied with his appearance. His horse was thin and old, but to him it was a faithful steed. He mounted his horse. At that moment his niece ran up to him in shock. "Uncle, where are you going?" Concern filled her eyes. But he was already lost in thoughts of distant adventures. His heart was filled with nothing but adventure. And before his eyes stood only the image of himself as a hero. "From now on I am Don Quixote, a brave knight setting off in search of adventures," he proclaimed his new name loudly, unconcerned by the strange looks from the villagers. Knights no longer exist in this day and age. Adventures are all but tales, his niece said cautiously. But Don Quixote did not heed her words. His mind was already filled with a world of fantasy. The adventure finally begins. "Ah, my beloved Princess Dulcinea, I will fight to the end for you," he vowed in his heart. Don Quixote chose a farmer's daughter from a nearby village as his Princess Dulcinea. His love for her was pure and infinitely noble. To him she was not merely a farmer's daughter, but the driving force of all his adventures, the source of his courage and strength. Don Quixote's heart was filled with the desire to fight for her and win her love. His adventure began at this moment, along with his loud proclamation. Having decided to embark on the path of adventure, Don Quixote now needed to find a trustworthy companion. He turned his gaze to a farmer from his neighborhood named Sancho. Although considered not particularly clever by the villagers, Sancho's loyalty and pure heart were what mattered to Don Quixote. On a bright morning, Don Quixote made his way to Sancho's house. His steps were filled with resolute determination. Upon reaching Sancho's house, he knocked on the door and shouted loudly, "Sancho, come forth on an adventure with me. Let us bring justice to the world with our bravery and strength." Sancho was initially puzzled. However, Don Quixote's fervent passion and persuasive words moved him. "Really, Sir Knight? You wish to take me on an adventure?" Hope sparkled in Sancho's eyes. Don Quixote confidently replied, "Yes, Sancho. If you become my faithful squire, I shall grant you lands to conquer." Hearing this, Sancho's eyes widened even more. He had spent his life toiling in the fields, well aware of how precious a piece of land was. Sancho's eyes twinkled as he responded to Don Quixote. "Sir Knight, I will do whatever I can. I too shall become your squire and follow you." From that moment, Sancho became Don Quixote's faithful companion. Following closely behind Don Quixote, the two set off on their adventure. The pairing of Don Quixote and Sancho might have seemed somewhat ludicrous to the villagers, but to the two of them, nothing could be more serious. The high ideals of Don Quixote and Sancho's simple loyalty converged, leading their adventure in unpredictable directions. From that moment on, Don Quixote and Sancho became inseparable companions, stepping together into a world of strange and fantastical adventures. Don Quixote and Sancho continued their adventure, crossing vast plains. One day, Don Quixote's gaze settled on distant spinning objects. His imagination instantly caught fire. "Sancho, look! Far away, giants await us. Do you not see their massive arms slicing through the sky?" Excitement and challenge filled Don Quixote's eyes. Sancho squinted towards the distance, but all he saw were ordinary windmills spinning in the wind. "It's just a windmill, sir. Not a giant," Sancho cautiously replied. But the flames of battle were already burning in Don Quixote's mind. Don Quixote did not listen to Sancho. In his imagination, the giants were threatening the world with their evil deeds, and only he could stop them. "Giants, face my lance!" He gripped his metal lance tightly, ready for battle. Sancho looked at his master with worried eyes, but Don Quixote had already made up his mind. Don Quixote urged his gaunt horse forward. With hooves thundering against the ground, they charged towards the windmill at full speed. "Watch, Sancho, as the giants fall before us," Don Quixote shouted with fervor. However, the reality was far different from Don Quixote's imagination. One of the windmill's blades struck Don Quixote, sending him spiraling into the air. He tumbled through the sky like a doll, eventually crashing to the ground with a thud. Lying on the ground, Don Quixote looked up at the sky. His body ached, but his pride was hurt even more. "This is the work of sorcerers. They transformed the giants into windmills to deceive my eyes." Don Quixote consoled himself, believing not that he had been defeated, but that he had contended with the power of magic. Sancho rushed to his master's side, looking at him with pity. "Sir, are you all right?" His voice was full of concern, but Don Quixote refused to acknowledge his failure. He still dreamed of the next adventure in his heart. Even after the collision with the windmill, Don Quixote's spirit of adventure was unbroken. He interpreted the incident as an act of magic, convinced that the massive windmill was in reality a transformed form of the wind god. "Sancho, did you see what happened before your eyes? Sorcerers turned the giant into a windmill to thwart my victory," Don Quixote exclaimed excitedly. Sancho was baffled by his master's imagination, but his loyalty to Don Quixote remained unwavering. "Sir, then how shall we avenge ourselves against the wind god?" Pondering Sancho's question, Don Quixote's expression turned resolute. "When the wind god appears, we must fight again. Justice will eventually triumph." Days passed and Don Quixote and Sancho found themselves walking along a dusty road. Suddenly Don Quixote's eyes perceived a scene of armies clashing amidst the dust. "Look, Sancho! In that dust, the armies of two nations are battling. It is our duty to stand on the side of justice." Don Quixote readied his lance to charge into battle. Sancho blinked and looked around, but all he saw was a flock of sheep kicking up dust as they passed in front of them. "But sir, those are just sheep, not an army," Sancho cautiously remarked. Don Quixote did not heed Sancho's words. The flames of battle were already alight in his heart. He charged at the flock of sheep, imagining them as the enemy army. The sheep scattered in terror, and the shepherds, infuriated by Don Quixote's reckless action, began to attack him. This illusionary battle soon ended in chaos and defeat. Don Quixote was bruised and battered by the shepherds, but his heart remained firmly convinced that he must continue the fight for justice. On a rainy day, Don Quixote and Sancho were crossing the countryside. Suddenly they saw a barber sheltering from the rain with a metal basin on his head. At that moment Don Quixote's eyes lit up. "Sancho, look! There lies the legendary golden helmet." In his imagination, the metal basin had transformed into a mystical golden helmet of immense value. Sancho looked around, perplexed. "Sir, that's just the barber's basin. It's not a golden helmet." But Don Quixote's fantasy was unstoppable. He resolved to dash forward and claim the golden helmet. Don Quixote spurred his horse towards the barber, his eyes filled with desire for the golden helmet. "Beautiful golden helmet, you shall now be mine." He rejoiced as if he were an ancient warrior who had found a precious treasure. As Don Quixote approached, the barber, startled, clutched the metal basin tightly on his head. "Halt! Fight me! If not, surrender the golden helmet." Don Quixote demanded a duel, his voice full of resolve. The barber, confused, could not comprehend the situation. He had only used the basin to shield himself from the rain. But suddenly a knight was demanding it as a golden helmet. Seeing Don Quixote's seriousness, the barber became frightened and decided to flee. Don Quixote chased after the fleeing barber. However, the rain and mud slowed him down, and the barber quickly disappeared. Luckily, the metal basin fell as the barber fled, and Don Quixote picked it up, placing the basin on his head. Don Quixote was thrilled as if he had truly acquired a golden helmet. Sancho, behold! This golden helmet is a divine gift proving my valor. During their journey, Don Quixote and Sancho encountered a young man weeping. Tears were in his eyes, and his heart was full of the pain of love. Sob, I have parted from my beloved. Our love was like a flower blooming under the starlight, yet this world has torn us apart. The young man's story deeply resonated with Don Quixote. He thought of his own princess Dulcinea and felt a profound empathy. Sancho, see the sorrow of this young man. Is love indeed an unavoidable fate even on the path of a knight? Am I not also fighting for my beloved princess Dulcinea? He instructed Sancho. Sancho, go back home for a while. Deliver a letter filled with my heart to my beloved princess Dulcinea. Sancho gladly accepted Don Quixote's request. On his way home, he encountered the barber and priest, friends of Don Quixote. Sancho, where are you headed? The priest inquired. Sancho explained that he was going to the hometown to deliver Don Quixote's message. The priest and barber showed interest in this news. Is Don Quixote well? We are quite worried about him. Sancho informed the priest and barber that Don Quixote was adventuring, sharing his extraordinary exploits. Upon hearing Sancho's stories, the priest and barber began to plan bringing Don Quixote back home. They knew that while Don Quixote was engrossed in adventure, the villagers and Don Quixote's niece were worried about him. We must persuade Don Quixote to return home. His adventures are too dangerous, and those who love him are concerned for his well-being, the priest said. After forming their plan, the priest and barber decided to send a message through Sancho. They asked him to persuade Don Quixote to return home. Sancho returned to Don Quixote's side to undertake this important mission, firmly resolved to bring Don Quixote safely back home. In the deep of night, Don Quixote was sleeping peacefully in a secluded forest. At this time, the priest and barber, along with Sancho, quietly approached him. They moved carefully, trying not to wake Don Quixote. Their plan was to secretly take Don Quixote back home. They gently lifted him, laid him on a large bed, and placed him in a carriage. We have come to save you, Don Quixote. When you wake, you will already be in the embrace of your hometown. The priest whispered. The carriage quietly left the forest, slowly heading towards Don Quixote's hometown. When Don Quixote woke up at home, he could not remember how he had arrived there. But his niece and the villagers sincerely welcomed his safe return. Don Quixote rested at home for several weeks. His adventures became the talk of the village, and his courage and determination were admired. One day a scholar visited Don Quixote. Don Quixote, I am moved by your bold adventures, and I wish to write your story in a book. Your courage and fight for justice are worth remembering by all. Don Quixote was thrilled at the thought of his story being recorded forever. Don Quixote was greatly encouraged by the scholar's proposal. The idea that his adventures would be remembered by future generations gave him new energy. This means my adventures have not yet ended. I must set out again. I must traverse the world spreading messages of courage and hope. Don Quixote approached Sancho to share his resolution. Sancho, are you prepared to join me again? Our adventure is not over yet. We can make the world a better place. Sancho followed Don Quixote without hesitation. After all the adventures and trials, Don Quixote and Sancho decided to set out once again. This time they dreamed of even greater and grander adventures. Don Quixote tightened his armor and placed his old helmet on his head. His eyes still shone with unwavering resolve. Sancho, are you ready? What adventures we will face this time? No one knows. But our courage and justice will not falter in the face of any trial. Sancho, mounting his donkey, smiled broadly. Yes, sir. I am always ready to follow you, sir. Anywhere, whatever the task. His faithful heart and unwavering loyalty did not waver by Don Quixote's side. Don Quixote laughed heartily and exclaimed loudly, "Then let's go, Sancho. Everything awaits us. Our names will once again echo throughout the world." Knight Don Quixote and his faithful squire Sancho set out once more for justice, for adventure. His voice was powerful and brave, and his figure was truly that of a knight. The two companions marched powerfully across the sunlit plains. The road before them was endless, filled with possibilities. The adventures of Don Quixote and Sancho were far from over. Their story continued, and the legend of their courage and friendship would never be forgotten even as time passed.